The city of Bethlehem is located in modern-day Palestine. It is about 5 miles south of Jerusalem. The name Bethlehem in Hebrew means house of bread. It is not a coincidence that the bread of life was born there. Around the 1st century AD, Bethlehem was a small, relatively unimportant town, that is, until Christ was born there. Matthew 2:6 quotes Micah 5:2 saying, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Bethlehem is seldom mentioned in the Old Testament. In the book of Ruth, Ruth and Naomi moved to Bethlehem from Moab. Ruth is King David's great-grandmother, and so this will become the birthplace of King David. The Messiah is a descendant of King David, so this brings Bethlehem to prominence. The Magi found Christ by following the Star of Bethlehem. While we don't know exactly what this star was, we know that it was a sign from God. There is a metal star that marks the place that Christ was born in the Church of the Nativity in modern-day Bethlehem. It is a 14-point star according to the genealogy of Jesus Christ found in Matthew. All the generations of Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David until the captivity in Babylon are 14 generations, and from the captivity in Babylon until the Christ are 14 generations. There's a common misconception amongst Christians that the Magi, or wise men, came to visit Jesus while he was still in the manger the day that he was born. But this is not the tradition of the church. The word Magi is plural for magus, which means magician. The Magi were priests in the Zoroastrian religion and kings from the Persian Empire, or modern-day Iran. Zoroastrianism was based on the worship of Ahura Mazda, the god of light. As the Romans used to sacrifice animals and examine their bowels to predict victory in wars, the Persians would look for prophecy in their stars, which they saw as a source of light. When the Magi saw a sign in the stars that there was a new king to be born for the Jews, they traveled to Jerusalem and began inquiring about the new king in order to pay their respects. Herod the Great was troubled by this news because he was king. Herod, being an Arab and not a Jew, felt threatened, especially because the Jews never accepted him as their king. Herod gathered all of the chief priests to find out where this Messiah was supposed to be born. There's a stark difference between the way the Magi received Jesus into the world and the way Herod received Christ. This will be a common theme throughout Christ's life, and continues until this day. The acceptance or rejection of Christ is often based on the softness or hardness of one's heart. Imagine Jesus Christ is the sun. The sun makes some things, such as mud, hard. On the contrary, heat can make gold soft. The makeup of one's heart determines his ability to accept Christ, as the Magi did, or to reject Christ, as Herod did. In contrast to the Gospel according to St. Luke, who wrote to a Gentile audience, St. Matthew wrote more to a Jewish audience, who would have been more familiar with the Old Testament. So Matthew includes many details to show the Jews how Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy of the Messiah. The prophets of the Old Testament, such as Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah, prophesied that in the end days, that is, when the Messiah would come, the Gentiles would come worship the God of Israel. They would turn from their idolatry and worship the true God. This occurs in Jesus Christ. This is not simply a story of Judea's Messiah, but the beginning of the last days, and the whole world coming to worship the one true God. For the Magi, who were Gentiles, their religious longings weren't to Ahura Mazda, but for Jesus Christ. This is true for everyone. Different societies over the millennia may have worshipped different things: false gods, statues, money, politicians, athletes. But all of these are distractions from what our heart longs solely for, our relationship with Jesus Christ. In the ancient world, many believed that the stars were a mirror of what was going on in the earth. If one could figure out what was going on in the heavens, they could understand what was going on earth. A new star meant a new king. For the Zoroastrian Magi, the stars were their connection to the gods, at least to Ahura Mazda, their god of light, and the gods of the other nations that are actually demons who fell from heaven. According to them, this happened around the time of the confusion of tongues at the Tower of Babel. But the stars, which were used for the worship of this false god, are now moving in a way to worship Jesus, even as an infant, since he is the only true God and has dominion over all gods. As the Psalms say, "Oh, give thanks unto the God of gods." The very stars moving shows that Jesus is more than just David's descendant and king of Judea. The Troparion of the Nativity of Christ states, "Those who worship the stars were taught by a star to worship thee, the Son of Righteousness." Jesus is the King of the Jews, but even more than that, the God of heaven and earth. Daniel the prophet had predicted the birth of the Messiah almost exactly to the date of when it occurred. Daniel prophesied this while he was in captivity in Babylon, the same place that the Magi would come from. The Magi offers gifts to the newborn king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold is a gift fitting for a king. Frankincense is something that is offered to God, and myrrh, a very fragrant oil used to embalm the dead, reveals Christ's humanity and prophesies his impending death. The gifts of the Magi reveal the truth about who Jesus Christ is, God and man, King of all creation. To this day, the gifts of the Magi are intact as relics in the monastery of St. Paul on Mount Athos. Matthew recounts the visit of the Magi like this: "And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him: gold, frankincense, and myrrh." Joseph isn't mentioned in this passage, but Mary is. In 1 Kings, the first thing that Solomon did when he became king was to set up another throne for his mother, Bathsheba, who was in Jesus' genealogy. Although the first and second books of Kings, the king and his mother are listed. Mary is the queen, and so she is listed as the mother of the king. She is also the fulfillment of the prophecy of King David in Psalm 144, "At thy right hand stood the queen." The fact that Jesus is the king makes Mary the queen in the Hebrew tradition. Jesus is the reason that Mary is so important. In icons of the Theotokos in Christ, Christ is enthroned on Mary. In Orthodox icons of the Nativity of Christ, Mary is depicted with Christ in the cave, while Joseph is seen outside, either by himself or being tempted by a man in shaggy clothes, who represents the devil, who tries to convince him that Mary was not a virgin. He is not with Jesus and Mary, because he is only Jesus' stepfather, while God is Jesus' father. King Herod asked the Magi to report back to him when they find Jesus, so that he may come and worship him also. Herod was considered an outsider and was not accepted as king by the Jews, but was given authority by the Romans. He was threatened by the birth of a future Jewish king of Israel, and sought to kill the Christ child in order to keep his kingdom. The Magi were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, but to return to their country using a different path. When he realized that he'd been fooled by the Magi, he went into a rage and ordered that all of the male children in his kingdom under 2 years old be killed. Hosea 11:1 states, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." Quoting the Bible is not only about the verse itself, but about that entire section or chapter of the book. The biblical number system was not part of the original text and was added centuries later. They would quote the beginning of the chapter, and by doing so, were referring to the entire section. So in Hosea 11, Israel was the son that he was calling out of Egypt. Hosea continues talking about how bad the Judeans were for being rescued from Egypt by God, yet worshiping false gods. Matthew is not saying that Jesus is the son that Hosea is talking about. Herod killing all of the male Hebrew children under 2 was saying that Judea has now become as evil as Egypt was. Remember, the final straw for God against Pharaoh resulted in God killing all of their firstborns. God had to deliver his son Jesus from his own people, who he was sent to save, because they would have killed him. Matthew again quotes the Old Testament, this time Jeremiah 31:15, saying, "A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more." Once again, this is not a standalone quote about the verse, but draws our attention to the entire section. This chapter was referring to the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC by the Romans, but was also a prophecy of the slaughter of innocents by Herod. The verses following, however, give a message of hope, of how the Savior will save his people. Indeed, Galilee would be the place of Christ's ascension to heaven, the same place he was raised after leaving Egypt. An angel came to Joseph in a 4th dream to warn him, saying, "Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt and stay there until I bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him." Here Joseph can be likened to Joseph, the son of Jacob, in the book of Genesis. The Joseph of the Old Testament begins in the Promised Land and ends up in Egypt. Interpreting dreams comes to power, and as a result, is able to save his family in Egypt. By the New Testament, Joseph having his dream, he takes his family to Egypt to save them, and as a result, Christ is able to come to power and save his people, meaning the whole world, all creation. Some church fathers say that Egypt is a type of Hades. Christ going to Egypt and then returning up to Galilee was a prophecy that Christ would die, descend to Hades, and then rise. Christ's ascension to heaven also took place in Galilee. Joseph remains in Egypt with his family until he receives his 3rd dream, telling him that Herod had died and to return to the land of Israel. A 4th dream, he is told to go to Nazareth to avoid Archelaus, Herod's son, who took over the region of Bethlehem. A lesson can be learned that even if a king opposes God's will and uses all means to stop it, God shall prevail. When Jesus and his parents went to Jerusalem for Passover, they were traveling in a caravan of relatives and other people who were also traveling for the feast. There would have been many people, and so it would have been easy for someone to go missing for a day or so. They found him in the temple after 3 days, foreshadowing his death and resurrection on the 3rd day. Jesus was 12 years old when he was found teaching in the temple, amazing the teachers. This is significant because it shows us that Jesus is the wisdom of God. At 12, he would have been considered a child by Jewish law. 13 is the age that a Jewish male was considered a man. Mary asks Jesus, "Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought you anxiously." Jesus responds to his parents that he was doing his father's business. He's reminding them who his father is, God, not Joseph. Mary and Joseph still do not fully understand what he was saying. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject to them. This shows Christ's humility, but also that he follows his own law to honor his father and mother.